today. We're just going to talk about communication. Really, the chapter 4 is talking about the power of words, right? The power of words, and pretty much when we come to communication, George Bernard, pretty much talks about the fact that the biggest problem of communication is when we think that we have communicated, whereas we have not communicated, right? Most times we've said something and we think that people heard what we said. Sometimes we said something that we didn't know we said. Several times I've done recordings here and I thought this is what I said. But when I'm listening to the recording, I hear myself saying something different. I don't know how it happened, but I know for sure what I said. But when I'm listening to the recording, I'm hearing myself saying something different. However it happened, I have no clue. But you can understand that there are a lot of times we say something, we think we know for sure what we have said, but the person that's listening to us is hearing something entirely different from what we intended to say. That's why sometimes it's good to get feedback, to ask people, what did they hear? Because what you think you said might not be exactly what that person is saying. Again, also, you might say one thing and you're definitely saying that thing, but because of your gesticulation, the person is hearing something exactly different from what you said. And this is a physical phenomenon. It's not an assumption. This is a research topic. What a person sees overrides what the person hears. What a person sees can change what is being said. If I'm gesticulating one way and saying something different another way, the person is hearing more of my gesticulation than what I'm saying. And it's a physical thing, so that I'm saying house, the person might be hearing him. I'm saying house, but because of my gesticulation, what the person is hearing is in, right? It's been experimented and it's true, So so when it comes to communication, we have to be careful, because most times we think we're saying one thing and the person is hearing something entirely different, and communication is very core to relationships. If we don't have communication right, we cannot have a good relationship, with people. And here, we cannot be able to win with our words if our communications are faulty. Because we might be nice people, we might be trying to be nice, but whoever is hearing us is seeing us as not nice. We think we're communicating niceness, but the person is perceiving it as hostility, right? Just because of a breakdown in communication, right? So, therefore, in effective communication, obviously, which is essential in all walks of life, whether it be in the workplace, in the family, with our children, with our siblings, with our parents, it's important. It helps us to have oneness, right, in our relationships, right, and takes away confusion when we're effective in communicating, right? And there are different styles of communication which we all tend to use in different circumstances, right? For one, there's direct communication, there's indirect communication. People who are forthright would use direct communication most often than not. But there are circumstances where even though you are forthright, you tend to use indirect communication because of the specific nature of the circumstance. Typically in political settings, you will tend to use indirect communication because you are working on the person's emotion, not on his intellect. Typically when you're working on the person's intellect, understanding, it's best to use a direct communication. But if you're trying to influence somebody, you are trying to move someone's emotion from one state to the other, using a direct communication will not help you, right? Most times you would need to use indirect communication, because it's not as much as what the person is understanding, but it's what the person is feeling. You're working on the person's feeling, not necessarily understanding, right? So there is a power of using direct communication if it's clarity that you're trying to gain. But if it's feeling, emotions you're working on, direct communication might not necessarily help you, right? So you need to then understand different circumstances and what best to use to gain your audience, or to help your audience to follow, or to take them to where you want to take them to, right? But typically, when it comes to, and let's look a bit at the difference between the two of them, right? And so when it comes to comparing them in clarity, like I said, when you're using direct communication, you are pretty much just going direct. You're saying the way you feel it, and the way you think, and the way you feel, without bringing any confusion per se. You're not really necessarily concerned about the person's emotion, but you're trying to just pass the message across, right? But if you're trying to work on the person's emotion, where there's probably a cultural difference, or a gender or generational difference, just using direct communication might not break the divide. So you probably then need to use some indirect communication to work on the person's feeling, right? On the person's emotion, not just the clarity of the message, right? So just the same thing I'd said earlier on, in terms of clarity, but when you need to be polite and avoid offending the recipient, you might need to use direct communication. Indirect communication would help at that point also. Obviously, if you when it comes to indirect communication, it's not as much as the words you're saying, but the gesticulations, right? You're saying, don't just listen to my words, listen to my gesticulation, because there's a whole lot that is, when you're using direct communication, you're explicit with your words. When you're using indirect communication, you're not necessarily explicit to your word, you're implicit. You are creating an environment that is needing interpretation by the person that is reading it. Interpretation might be from your cues, the way you move, the way you gesticulate, all of those are part of your communication, right? So, and they have their pros, their cons per se. Like I said, it all depends on the audience and the intent of the communication, So if like we're talking right now, there's a whole lot of directness, that comes to place. But more than the directness, also all the gesticulations also support what is being said. But I wouldn't use indirect communication here, because it's like a teaching session, right? So in a teaching session, I'm not working on your emotions, I'm working on your intellect, right? I'm not working on your emotions, I'm working on your intellect. There's still a bit of emotions to come to it, but the major focus is your intellect, right? In the political setting, and I'm trying to win your vote, it's not as much as your intellect I'm trying to work on. I'm trying to work on your emotions. So I'm saying words that will eat on your emotions so that I can get your vote, I can get your sympathy, as it were, So it all depends on what you're talking about, the environment you're in. That will determine which one you want to use or not use, right? So when you go direct communication, your language is clear, you're going straight forward, you're trying to get a resolution of probably a confusion per se, but if it's indirect, all you're saying is needing interpretation. What you're saying could mean A to one person, mean B to the other person, and sometimes it's intentional. You're trying to create confusion. It's more like when we go to do presentations, we say that you can do it in one of two ways. You can either dazzle them with your brilliance or confuse them with your BS, right? But either way, you'll get through. Either you're going to dazzle them with your brilliance or confuse them with your BS, right? So if you dazzle them with your intellect or with your intelligence, that's direct communication. If you're going to confuse them with your BS, that's indirect, right? You're giving them different things, and it's up to their own interpretation One is explicit, the other one is implicit, right? So just different communication styles depending on what you're trying to get out, from the engagement. In different circumstances of life, what you use might matter. As I was thinking and meditating along this line, issues of life, work life for me came to bear, right? I had some issues, tough times when I got back from Houston, to work locally back in 2016. And I kind of trusted the people I was engaging with, and I was, respectful. And, because of the assumption of relationship, I wasn't as direct as I could be, but after all that time going through a depression and coming out and all of that, as I look back, I did a look back, I saw how things could have been different, if I did not have the assumption of trust, right? I trusted the people I was relating with. I had an assumption that they had my best interest at heart, so I wasn't as direct as I could be, right? But that did not help me, it gave them more ammunition against me, right? So part of my lesson in all of that is, just to be more direct, right? Be resolute as to what I want to get, and as Maya Angelou would say, if someone shows you their color, believe it, right? Don't believe it, because you might save yourself a whole lot of heartache, right? Yeah, it's good to give people believe good intention. That's what we get to tell ourselves, right? Believe that someone has good intention. But when the person shows you doesn't have good intention, believe it. Because if you don't believe it, it might hurt you where you very bad and very deep, right? And I've had to say it in some circumstance that, hey, it's a waste of time for me to believe the person has good intentions. Already shown he doesn't have good intention. Why waste my time? I might as well address it. Let's address ourselves where we meet ourselves, So those are sometimes where you need to choose as to the kind of communication you need to engage in, depending on the person you're engaging with and the circumstance, of life. Have another issue, going on right now, where someone is seemingly undermining my personality and my work, and really I can address this person face on, right? I just give it up to the person, I can do that. I've done that before, but I'm also being mindful as to how best to do this in a way where there will not be conflict, but yet still get the same thing done. And as I meditate on scripture where the Bible says that be as wise as a serpent, but as gentle as a dove, right? Be as wise as a serpent, but don't lose who you are, right? Address life issues, but address it as who you are. Don't lose the person that you are because you are addressing a life issue, right? Don't address the pig, but don't get soiled by the debt, right? So there's a way you can address a pig without being soiled by the debt that the pig is inside, so that takes a bit of tact, to it. It means that, and it takes a bit of directness also, but not directness at the wrong time per se, so I don't